Ahead and get started. I have 6:02 on my clock. So again, you are joining a class this evening on pesticide safety. We wanted to let you know that we will be recording this class for folks that are not able to join us live, or in case you have any questions and you want to go back and rewatch it. So we'll be recording it, and then after the class, we will be sending out the PowerPoint as a PDF for anybody who wants to go back and look back at any of the slides that we go over as well. So by participating, you are giving us the consent to go ahead and record. So I'm going to go ahead and click start recording. So we will go ahead and get started. If you guys have any questions, as Sherry said, please feel free to enter them into the chat box, and we will be monitoring that. And then at the end, if we want to unmute folks, we can do that as well, since we're going to have a small group tonight. So with that, I wanted to give a quick introduction. My name is Ashley Bodkins, and I work with the University of Maryland Extension in Garrett County. I work with the Master Gardener program in Garrett County as the coordinator, and I also answer horticulture questions. So anytime we have people that have questions about bugs, or what to do about an insect pest or a disease in their yard, those questions come to me in the office. We also are very lucky to have my co-host with me this evening, Miss Sherry Frick. I don't know, do you want to say a quick hello, Sherry, or?
Yeah, sure. So like I said, I'm so glad everyone is here. This is not probably one of the more popular topics. Not many people get excited about pesticide safety, but certainly we are glad you are here. And I am the Master Gardener Coordinator in Allegheny County, and I also teach pesticide safety to our farmers who have private applicator licenses, and they have to keep up that certification. Every 3 years they have to have so many hours of training, and I do that for the folks in Allegheny County. So that's my background on this subject. So I'll hand it over to you, Ashley.
All right, wonderful. So because I am having some internet connectivity issues, I'm going to leave my video off. So we're going to go ahead and move right along. So to start things off, we need to talk about what is a pest? Why would you even want to consider using pesticides? So as Sherry said, she teaches this for her private applicators in Allegheny County. And my experience with teaching pesticide safety is more for the homeowner side of things. But I did grow up on a dairy farm, and I currently live just a couple miles from the dairy farm and have a small beef farm. So from that perspective, I do have my my private pesticide applicator's license. I think you're going to be in good hands if you do have questions. We would love to try to answer them for you. But what is a pest? So it's any organism that is detrimental to humans. So it can be anything that destroys crops or structures, so your home, your barns, any buildings, as well as your crops. And your crops could include, of course, your vegetable garden, maybe even your ornamental crops. Usually a pest is going to pose some sort of a threat to human health or livestock. So that falls into that category would be things like ticks and lice and all those kind of creepy crawly critters that, a lot of times we end up having to control whether we want to or not. And a pest can also just reduce aesthetic or recreational value. So everyone has a different threshold of what they can handle as far as the pest goes. Some people want to have a pristine lawn with no pests. Some people are okay with a few weeds here and there. So everyone has to kind of figure that out on their own. What is the threshold that they're going to reach when it gets to the point where they want to control this pest, or they don't want to take any more lip, I'll say, from the pest, and when they want to actually take a stand against it. So some of the different types of pests that we encounter would be anything from weeds to insects to different types of diseases, so fungus, bacteria, even viruses, and then even wildlife fall into this category. So the next few slides are going to tell us a little bit about how we control these pests. We have a lot of different options. I'll say we have, So we don't have just one single way to control each of these pests. There's lots of different ways to do that. And by trying to figure out the least harmful method, that's something called integrated pest management. And Sherry and I talked a lot about that in a class we did 2 weeks ago. So if you're interested in that, we can send you that link, or it is on our Western Maryland Cluster YouTube channel. But the bottom line is that there's different ways. So you can see from this chart, the center of the graph shows you the goal is to control the pest. So you can do things like plant rotation, different timing when you're planting. So if you can plant your crop whenever there's no pests around, that's always the best bet. You can use traps. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with like the pheromone traps for Japanese beetles. Here in Garrett County, I just started seeing Japanese beetles within the last week. So a lot of people use the pheromone traps, which can be a little bit tricky. If you are going to use them, make sure you don't put them near an area that you have a lot of Japanese beetles that are visiting, which kind of sounds silly, but you want to put it at the opposite end of your property from where you have those high value crops that they like apples or, you know, grapes or something like that. Put them at the opposite end, and be sure that if you are using a trap that you are emptying it quite regularly, because you don't want there to be an overflow of beetles that are coming and just breeding and then laying their eggs in the grass in your yard. So that's my little spiel on Japanese beetles. But you can also do things like hand picking, sanitation, you know, so cleaning up your yard and gardens, and then also the use of natural enemies. So encouraging habitats that are going to be friendly to your natural enemies. And all this, again, the whole goal of all these different types of control strategies is to control the pest. And one of those options within this graph is, of course, the use of pesticides. So that's what we're going to be talking the most about tonight is, you know, not cultural control, not mechanical control, but actually using pesticides and how to do that safely and when is the best time to do so. Okay. So as I said, integrated pest management, or it's abbreviated as IPM, is a balanced tactical approach. So with it, again, you have lots of different ways that you can control the pest or the problem. So IPM is in the middle of this graph. So we have biological control, cultural control, chemical control, and then physical control. So again, this evening we are going to be talking about this chemical side of things. But nonetheless, it still focuses on some really important points with IPM. So you want to use several different tactics. You don't want to just always rely on chemical control. If you use the same chemical time after time after time on the pests, then it's going to build up resistance. And then when we have resistant pests, that's when we start to have a lot of other problems. It's also really important that you know what the problem is, so proper identification and knowing what the pest life cycle is. So this is really important, especially when we talk about disease and insect pests. Whenever you can control them when they're, for example, with insects, if you can control them when they're in the egg stage, that's a way better use of your time and effort than it is to wait until they're an adult and they're actively breeding and laying eggs. So things like that. Okay, so chemical control and pesticide safety. We wanted to put a few slides in here that talk specifically about what is a pesticide. So, you know, a lot of people, the first thing they hear when they hear the word pesticide, or the first thing they think of is going to be something like an herbicide, like Roundup. Roundup is in the news a lot. We hear a lot about it. If you sit down to watch anything on TV, you hear the claims about how it can cause ill effects to your health and things like that. But there's a lot of other things that we have in our yards and gardens and our pesticides. So this first class is what we call disinfectants. So I don't know if you've ever thought about these as pesticides, but they most certainly are. Their whole goal is to kill bacteria. So things like bleach and ammonia, toilet bowl cleaners, disinfectant aerosols, tile cleaners, pool and spa cleaners. All of these things have, you know, caution words on them and have words that tell you and have directions on how to kill or how to use them so that you don't cause problems to your health and so you don't cause problems to the environment. But especially in this day and age, I think everybody probably uses Clorox wipes or Lysol wipes. So, but there are caution statements on there that tell you things like you're not supposed to use these on your skin. You're not supposed to use them on your bare hands. But I don't know about you, but I often find that I'm using them to wipe my hands off and things like that. So disinfectants is a type of pesticide. The next type would be fungicides. Again, a lot of people think that, well, I'm not a fungus, so maybe fungicides are not that dangerous to our health, but they can cause some issues. So it's really important that we do follow what the direction labels are. So even things like paint additives, I never really thought about that one, that you add to your paint to help prevent mildew growth. That would be a type of fungicide. And even your treated seeds. So when you go to the store in the spring of the year and you buy your sweet corn and it has that pink treatment on there, a lot of times that's a fungicide treatment, sometimes insecticide too. Then of course we have the herbicides. Herbicides are meant to kill plants, green growing plants, things like stump treatments, weed and feed, lawn care products. A lot of people think that those are very low impact, but they can cause some issues if they're not used correctly. So an herbicide is anything that we use to kill unwanted plants. Then we have the insecticides. Okay, so this includes anything from repellents to the flea and tick collars that you use on your dogs and cats, flea shampoos, bug sprays, mosquito repellents, all these different things, garden dusts. A lot of people 35, 45, 55 years ago are very familiar with the Garden Dust 7. So that's one that a lot of people are very used to seeing on the garden shelves and things like that. But again, it has some pretty detrimental side effects if it's not used correctly. And then we have the class of rodenticides. So this is things that you use to kill mice and rats. And some of these can be pretty toxic if not used correctly. They have some pretty nasty after effects on if something were to eat the mouse while it was still alive and it had the poison in its system. So, thinking on up higher in the food chain and how that can affect things really negatively around your home and garden and within your habitat and ecosystem. And then wood preservatives is another class of pesticides that a lot of people don't think about, but here's an example of copper coat, which has a lot of copper in it, which would be considered an organic type of fungicide. But again, something that most people may not think about. You can see it does have the labels with the active ingredients, labels here in a few minutes, so people get more familiar with them, but just things to think about. And then the last class I had of pesticides would be animal or reptile repellents. And this is what you use to keep deer and raccoons and rabbits away from your garden. And even when I was looking for some photos to put in here, this was snake stopper. So it drives away snakes, lizards, and iguanas. So, these are all different things that a lot of people say, well, I don't use any type of pesticide in my lawn or garden. And then when you dig a little deeper, you find out, well, I guess maybe I do use some different types of pesticides. So we're going to be talking about how to use these things safely and how to keep everyone, including yourself and your family and the environment, safe. So how do pesticides work? So pesticides are going to be they vary depending on what type of mode of action they have. So the mode of action is how they work to control the specific pest. Every type of pesticide has a mode of action, and it's going to tell you that on the label for the most part. But the two main types we have are something called systemic or contact. So with the systemic pesticide, these actually have to be absorbed through whatever it is that you're applying it to. So if it's, if it's a systemic herbicide, it has to be translocated all the way through that plant. If it's a systemic insecticide that you put maybe on your fruit trees or something like that, it has to be taken up by the whole entire tree. And then whenever the pest bites that plant, it gets a dose of the pesticide, and then it kills the pest. Again, a lot of times these are going to be used on plants or on livestock. Your contact pesticides, they must come in direct contact with your target pest. So for the most part, with your contact pesticides, they have to actually physically touch it or ingest it in order for it to work. The contact pesticides are usually going to work a lot faster. So with your systemics, it's a process that has to be taken up, and it takes, for trees and things like that, it can take several months to get into the tree system and actually see progress happening. And then another category pesticides vary by is selectivity. So what range of pests they're going to affect. So when we talk about integrated pest management, we want to always try to lean towards the side of selective pesticides. So these selective ones are only going to kill certain types of weeds, certain types of insects, or certain plant pathogens. So for example, with herbicides, there are some herbicides that are some selective herbicides that only kill broadleaf weeds versus some that only kill grasses or things in the sedge family, things that have just monocots or monocotyledons. And then we have the non-selective category where it's going to kill absolutely anything. So we want to kind of, sometimes it makes sense to use non-selective. It just depends on what the goal is of the application. But in the example of an herbicide, a non-selective herbicide would be something like glyphosate. So it kills anything that's green and growing at the time of application. So again, once it gets a sufficient dose, it'll kill it regardless of if it's a broadleaf or a grass. Another example, we have a picture here on the right-hand side, is for BT, Bacillus thuringiensis. So this is one that's specific for caterpillars on fruit, vegetables, ornamental, and shade trees. So again, this is going to only kill caterpillars. You wouldn't have to worry about it killing any type of bee or anything like that. But unfortunately, it could kill something in the line of caterpillars or butterflies, because they do have the caterpillar larva stage. So hopefully that's making sense to everybody. Again, if you have questions, please stick them in the chat. All right. Sherry, maybe you can chime in, let me know how things are going. I can't seem to get the chat to open.
Oh, really? Okay. Things are going fine. We haven't had too many questions yet, so.
Okay, thank you much. We'll keep moving along then. Okay, the other way that pesticides vary is something called persistence, so how long they remain active in the environment. So we have residual pesticides, which mean that they remain active for weeks, months, or even years. So some examples would be herbicides that are used around guardrails, along the side of roads. If you think, wow, how is it possible that nothing ever is there? Well, it's probably been treated with a residual pesticide that's going to remain active for a very long time. Another example of that would be the product called Spike that you can apply to woody plants, so to control woody undergrowth and things like that. It lasts in the environment, I think, for like 36 months or something crazy like that. So again, and then we have the non-residual, which means that Mother Nature is going to inactivate the active ingredients very quickly. So some herbicides, they don't remain active in the soil for very long once applied. So again, things like glyphosate, they don't last very long on the soil. So when we're thinking about how to be safe and have the least negative effect on our environment, we want to use more of the non-residual types of pesticides, so that you're not going to have any of that carryover that may, inhibit something that you're trying to grow later in the year. Okay, so you're going to hear this a lot through the rest of this presentation, but the label is the most important tool that you have in your toolbox when we talk about pesticides. And understanding what all is on the pesticide label can really make all the difference. So once you start to look at any of the pesticides you may already have at your home, you may realize that all the information you need is right there. Okay, it tells you, you know, what the different, it'll tell you the trade name, it'll tell you the active ingredients, it'll tell you formulations, it tells you the signal words, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, why that matters. It tells you precautionary statements, environmental hazards. It tells you all the directions for mixing and loading, you know, how to apply it, how to store it, and then also how to dispose it. So again, we get a lot of questions about specifics in the office. You know, what about this? What about this? With this, or can you tell me more about it? And we always have to say, well, consult your label. If for some reason you know something happened to the label on your particular product, you can always Google that information with the company name, and you can get a copy of that particular label so that you can find all this information out. So you're going to see this a lot. The label is the law. No getting around that. Whatever is on that label is what you are supposed to abide by. Okay. And if we say it once, we're going to say it a million times. Read the label, read the label, read the label. That is going to be the most important step that you can do to make sure that you keep yourself safe and that you keep the environment safe. And again, all the information that you need is going to be right there, right where you can see it. So again, we're going to re-emphasize this. The label is the law, okay? And when I say that, it also goes a little deeper. So it means you do not apply any pesticide to a site that is not specifically labeled or listed on the label. If you do, that is a violation of the federal law and a misuse of that pesticide. So that's a big deal. Federal law, okay? That should make us all, you know, step back and really pay attention. So do not apply any pesticide to a site not specifically listed. So when I say site, that can mean crop, that can mean insect pest. I always tell folks, if you really want to be super careful, the label should have the insect pest that you're trying to control as well as the crop labeled or listed on the label. So for example, if I'm trying to control cucumber beetles on my cucurbits, then I have to make sure that the pesticide that I'm selecting has not only cucumber beetles on there, but also the control on cucumbers or squash or whatever it is, the plant that I'm trying to control the pest on, okay? So some more things about the labels that are on your pesticides. We have the word active ingredient, or AI. So this is the chemical responsible for what makes the mode of action work, how the activity happens within the pest that's being controlled. And then we have the inert ingredients, which a lot of times they're not even listed what they are. But that means that they have no pesticidal properties when they've tested them in labs and things like that. So this is an example of 7. So the active ingredient is going to be carbaryl with these great big long scientific names, and it's 20%. That means the rest of it, the other 80%, is just inert ingredients or carriers to help make this product either more active or, you know, it's just kind of filler. So a lot of times, several different products are sold under different names, which I think is the next few slides, what they call trade names, but the active ingredient is going to be the same in several different products. So it can kind of get complicated. Knowing what the active ingredient is more important than knowing what the trade name is. So here's some examples of that. So you can see the trade name would be things like, the company would be Hot Shot, and then, you know, the trade name would be Ant Shield. or something like that, or roach spray. And then if you get down in the little smaller rating, that's going to be where you have the active ingredients listed, which is what you as a homeowner or as someone who's going to be applying the pesticides really wants to pay attention to, is what is that active ingredient. So the chemical name, again, this identifies the chemical components and the structure of the active ingredient. So for example, turf care, turf and ornamental fungicide, that's going to be your trade name. Calanthanil is going to be the active ingredient. And then the chemical name is here with the blue box, which I'm not even going to try that one. Sherry, if you want to unmute and try that, you're welcome to. Tetrachlorothianitrile. But again, it's 82% in this product, and then your other inert ingredients are only 17%. So again, good information to know so you can compare products when you're out looking for them. Then we have the common name. So for example, the common name would be, in this example, chloranthanil. Chlorothalonil, I'm sorry. Other examples would be imidacloprid, 2,4-D, permethrin, things like that. So again, they're a little bit easier to say for most folks. And again, you can search the common names just like you can search the chemical names. The other required information that all pesticides have to have are these EPA numbers. So if you are a private pesticide applicator, you actually have to write down and keep records every time you apply pesticides. And along with those records, you have to include these EPA registration numbers. So again, it identifies the manufacturer and the specific product. So if there would ever be a problem linked to that product, it can be traced back to when it was sprayed, where it was manufactured, things like that. The bottom number, the EPA establishment number, it identifies the facility where the product was produced. So Sherry was showing me yesterday, so this example would be that it was produced in Texas. So I think that's pretty cool that all this information can be tracked, and everybody is responsible for keeping this information and keeping the environment safe this way. And then we have the use classification statement. So this is on restricted use as well as general use. So it tells you exactly what the product is intended. Okay, so for retail sale to and use only by certified applicators, that would be restricted use, or persons under their direct supervision, and only for those uses covered by the certified applicator certification. So again, this is another one of the things you want to look for. If you don't have your certified applicator license, then you wouldn't want to be using this product. That would be a violation of the law. More information about the classification statement. Restricted use pesticides. Again, these are going to be ones that you have to be certified to purchase. So if this is not going to be ones that you can just go to a big box store like Lowe's or Agway or something like that and purchase on your own. You have to actually show that you have your certified license in order to purchase these restricted use pesticides, okay? And the reason for that is usually because they have more potential to harm humans or non-target organisms or the environment. But the unclassified or general use pesticides, they usually have a lower toxicity, and these are going to be ones that just anybody can go out and purchase by the general public. And then I just wanted to talk a few minutes about this word, either hazard or toxicity, things like that. So, a lot of people come to Sherry and I, and they say, well, how do I know if it's safe? I want a safe product to use on my Japanese weed. And we have to go into this whole conversation about, well, what does the word safe really mean? And what it boils down to is more of the word, what I like to use is risk. So what is the risk associated with using this type of pesticide? But that's kind of a hard concept to grasp. But if you think about risk, you know, every time you get in your vehicle and drive down the road, you're taking a risk. You know, a lot of people feel that, you know, every time they get in a plane to fly somewhere, they're taking a risk. But what is that risk? Well, using pesticides is exactly the same. So there are different classifications of pesticides, and there are also the labels and the laws and the knowledge that you have to keep yourself safe or to reduce the amount of risk that you have. So this slide talks about hazard, which I again kind of replaced with the word risk, but the higher the toxicity, generally we consider that a greater hazard. So the whole goal of only letting, you know, not having restricted use pesticides, or not letting everybody be able to purchase restricted use pesticides without education and a pesticide applicator's license, it's going to help reduce the hazard to folks. Okay. Also, the higher the exposure, the more often you're exposed to something, that also increases the amount of hazard. So less exposure equals less hazard. And we just wanted to point out that, you know, we hear a lot of folks say, well, I only use organic. And I just want to point out that just because the word organic is on a pesticide, that does not necessarily mean that there is no risk or that there is no hazard. There are a lot of approved organic pesticides. A lot of people don't even realize that. But just because you are an organic grower does not mean that you have no tools in your toolbox when it comes to insecticides. So again, organic does not equal no risk. It does not equal no hazard. It's just a different group of pesticides that are available to organic growers. So, all right. With that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Miss Sherry.
Hey, so Ashley, see if you can give me control of your screen. And then,
okay, you want me to stop sharing, or you want to try to give you remote control?
Yeah, actually, why don't you just go ahead and stop sharing, and then I'll share since you were having some connectivity issues.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
That helps me because then I can see the chat easier. Thank you.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. And I need that to go away. And all right, so let me go back slide. Okay, is everybody seeing? Ashley, are you seeing my screen?
Yep, it looks good.
Okay, very good. Just wanted to check. So I wasn't continuing on and nobody could see it. Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about the different parts of the label in more detail, and then also about some ways to protect yourself when applying pesticides, and some health issues to think about. Okay, so signal words are the words that you're going to see on the label that indicate the relative acute toxicity to humans and to animals. And acute is the key word here. So acute means something that happens, it's really a dangerous thing happens and it's all at once. So basically what that means is you are exposed to a large quantity of pesticide. You have a high exposure at a particular moment in time. And you can contrast that with the word chronic, which would be being exposed to small amounts of pesticide over a long period of time. So this is high exposure in a short period of time, okay? And that's when companies make these pesticides, they have to go through a process to get it registered with the EPA, and they have to go through all kinds of tests that show, you know, what kind of hazards are associated with this particular chemical and how it affects humans and animals and the environment. So anyway, the tests that they do are focused on acute toxicity, not chronic toxicity of this product. So it's how it affects something in a very short amount of time with a high exposure. So we go from lowest warning to most dangerous warning. So the lowest level of warning would be caution, and then warning, and then danger poison. So we're going to talk about what each of these means, each of these signal words. Danger poison means it's highly toxic by any route of entry. And we'll talk about those routes of entry in a moment, but basically could be your skin, your eyes, you breathe it, you ingest it, okay? So that is the most dangerous of all. And a chemical that has this kind of warning label on it is not available to for general use. You have to, this would be restricted use, and you would have to have a license in order to buy it and to apply it. Okay, the next in line would be danger. So this is highly toxic by at least one route of exposure. For example, perhaps the pesticide you're using is highly corrosive, and if you were to splash it in your eyes, it could cause irreversible eye damage. So that would make for this danger signal word. This also would not be available to homeowners. It would be restricted use. Okay, and so then other signal words would be warning and caution. So the general use pesticides that are less hazardous than the other two we just talked about are the ones that are available to everybody. You don't have to have a license in order to purchase them or to use them. So warning means that it's moderately toxic, either orally or through your skin, or if you breathed it, or if it got in your eyes or on your skin. And then caution means it's only slightly toxic, either orally, dermally, or by breathing or through your eyes, or causing skin irritation. Okay, and as Ashley mentioned earlier, we want to emphasize trying to choose the least toxic chemical that's going to give you the desired level of control for whatever pest it is that is giving you a problem. That's safest for you, and it's safest for the environment. So you've probably heard this term a lot lately, PPE, and that stands for personal protective equipment. Okay, so we're going to talk about what you ought to have, and also this is a section on the label. So you should always read the label all the way through before you start applying a pesticide. And in the label, it will tell you what kind of personal protective equipment you ought to have. So follow the directions on the label. Now, some things, like let's say you were spraying a horticultural oil, which has fairly low risk, it may not particularly say you have to have any kind of protective clothing. But that does not mean that you should not do something to protect yourself from it. Just because it's low risk doesn't mean it's no risk, and you should always be trying to protect yourself from being exposed to harmful chemicals, okay? So we see an example of something you might see in the label. It says, when making applications, applicators must wear long sleeve shirts, long pants, protective gloves, protective boots, etc. And this one even goes on to say wear a face shield. So it depends on how toxic and also the type of formulation of your pesticide as to what kind of protective equipment you should have for yourself. You may also notice there is a non-agricultural use requirement. And what's important about this section of the label is that it will tell you how long you may have to wait in order to go back into an area that has been sprayed with a pesticide. Now, if you have an agricultural business and you have workers that go out and do spraying for you, it will have a section called the ag use requirements, and under there they'll have worker protection standards for how you're going to have to prepare your workers in order to safely apply the pesticide. But for general use, you probably more likely see this non-agricultural use requirement. And if you read on this particular example, it says, the area being treated must be vacated by unprotected persons. And it says, keep unprotected persons out of treated areas until sprays have dried. And that one's pretty general. You're probably going to see that on many pesticide labels, that you should wait if it's a liquid, you should wait until that spray has dried before anybody goes back in without any kind of personal protective equipment on. Another section of the label would be the environmental hazard statements. And this is going to tell you what kind of impacts are associated with this pesticide on the environment. And that could be on aquatic invertebrates, it could be on birds, it could be on bees, could be on water quality. Okay, so so this is the section where you're going to find bee warning labels, and you'll see the icon in the upper right hand corner. This is an icon that has been used more frequently lately on labels to help get your attention that the pesticide you are using is toxic to bees. So if you're spraying an insecticide in your vegetable garden and it kills bees, if you read that label, it will tell you that you may not use that pesticide on plants that are flowering. And that has to be followed. That is the law. So if you need to if you think you're going to put 7 on your cucumbers while they're in bloom to protect them from Japanese beetles or cucumber beetles, you may not do that. That is against the labeling, because 7 will kill honeybees, and you may not do that while any plant is in bloom that you're applying it to or is even nearby. Okay, also look out for chemical hazard warnings on the label. Sometimes the pesticides you are using are flammable or corrosive, and so you need to take precautions for that and how you store it and how you use it. All right, storage and disposal. This is also important. Most pesticides need to be stored above freezing, and many of them, below 90 degrees. Otherwise, it degrades the material, or if it's flammable, you don't want it to be too hot where you're storing it. So look for this part of the label. It will tell you how to safely store your pesticides. And then when you are finished with them, it will explain how you should dispose of the container. So for most any pesticide, you should triple rinse the container, which means fill it up and rinse it out 3 times, and then you can dispose of it. And I like to actually puncture, after I clean out those containers, I like to actually puncture them to make sure that nobody is going to try and reuse them for holding anything after that point. Now, if you have old pesticides that you need to dispose of, you can't just pour them out on the ground. You need to take them to a pesticide disposal site, and there are several in our state. I'm sure every state has them, and they have certain times when they will receive pesticides and other toxic materials from residents. So you'll have to check that out. But it's best if you can use up all of the pesticide. That way you don't have to worry about going to those lengths to dispose of it properly. And I forget where I was going with that. But also, I forgot what I was going to say. Let's just move on. It'll come back to me in a minute. Okay, so directions for use. This is, the really important part of the label that tells you, what crops or what sites you can apply the pesticide to. It will tell you the pests that the manufacturer claims the product will control. It will tell you how to mix and apply the product. And it will tell you if this particular pesticide will harm plants. That's what phytotoxicity means. And then also give you information on how to minimize drift of this pesticide. And we'll discuss drift in a little bit. And so I remember what I was going to say. So it's better to use ready-to-use products as much as possible, because you don't have to try and figure out what is the proper way to dilute it. And also, you won't hopefully be left with a lot of unused product. Then you have to try and figure out how to dispose of properly. So that's the point that I wanted to make with the last slide. Okay, whoops, we went backwards. Okay, so another section of the label that you should check out, and this is especially important to people who grow fruits and vegetables and you're going to be applying pesticides to, check the pre-harvest interval. And what that means is from the time that you apply that pesticide, there may be a certain number of days that have to pass before you can safely harvest that food and eat it. And that's because it takes a certain number of days for that pesticide to break down in the environment and get to the point where it's not dangerous to you to ingest. So make sure you check that out too. All right. So some examples of misuse would be applying the pesticide to a site not stated on the label, applying at a rate that's higher than what the label says you may do. So this is probably more likely to happen when you buy a concentrate of pesticide, and it will tell you you may only apply, for example, 4 ounces of this product per acre in 1 year. And so then you've got to calculate, how much to put in your backpack sprayer so that you don't go over that 4 ounces per acre limit. So it can get a little bit complicated. There's some math involved, and Ashley and I'd be glad to help you with that if you need help with that. But that is one example of misuse. Now, it's not a misuse to use it at lower than what is the rate that is on the label. Except I think it's some kind of application to structures for termites, but that's a rare thing. All right, another example of misuse would be storing your pesticides near food or water. So that's improper storage or improperly disposing of your pesticides, pouring them out on the ground instead of taking them to a proper facility that handles those kinds of dangerous wastes. Okay, read the label. So now we're going to talk about poisoning effects, what to expect or how these chemicals can affect your health, and if you're exposed to them. And this does happen from time to time. If you're, accidents do happen, or if you don't use the proper protective equipment, you could be exposed more than. So when you are exposed to pesticides, it can come in by the way of direct contact, which could be on your skin or your eyes. It could be systemic if you breathe the chemical in, or if you actually ingested it, you drank it or ate it. Or you may simply have an allergic reaction to it, which would cause hives or rash or your nose running, or even you could have bad allergic reactions sometimes. So you have to watch out for those symptoms. Okay, so
Sherry, can I interrupt you real quick?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, we're getting a lot of background noise on your side when you're talking. So
Really?
Yeah, like some thumping and bumping and things like that. So I don't know. Just wanted to let you know.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Maybe I'm hitting the computer, the cord. That might be it. So I'll try not to do that. Okay. So let me know if I'm still doing it in a few slides. Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about the routes of entry, and the number one entry or way that you're going to get exposed to pesticides is through your skin. And then 97% of all exposure during spraying is through your skin. And guess what? It's most often happening on your hands or your forearms. Okay, now this is a really interesting slide. So different parts of the body vary in their ability to absorb pesticides. So luckily, your palms and your forearms and the soles of your feet are areas that don't absorb pesticides as strongly as other areas of your body. So if you get it on your forearm or your palm, the pesticide is not absorbed as readily. However, if you get the pesticide in your armpit or in your ear or on your scalp, and especially in your genital area,
you will absorb way more of the pesticide. So please note, for the genital area, there is 100% absorption of chemicals. So you're probably thinking, why in the world would that happen? Well, I suppose you could spill it in your lap if you were sitting, or more likely if you were using a pesticide and you didn't wash your hands and then you went to use the restroom. So that's probably the most likely way you're going to get pesticide exposure there. So you do need to be careful for all of your body, but be aware that there are areas of your body that absorb pesticides more readily than others. So the number 2 route of entry for pesticide exposure is by breathing the pesticide in, so it's your lungs. And this is common when using wettable powders, dusts, you're using vapors, atomized sprays, or gases. And you're most likely to be exposed to this while mixing and loading and during applications. The third most common route of entry is through your eyes. So eyes actually absorb a surprisingly large amount of chemical. So you need to protect your eyes. Now you're most likely gonna be having your eyes exposed when you are mixing pesticides, and I have done this. So you pour the amount of the concentrate you need into your backpack sprayer, and then you put the hose in there and you turn it on, and you're not careful about how strongly that water's going in, and then some of that liquid splashes back up in your face. So it does happen, and so it's best if you're mixing to have some eye protection. Some safety glasses would be great. Also think about if you are spraying above your head and you're looking up, well, some of that spray is going to come down and it may get in your eyes and in your face. So you might want to wear a hat and glasses. Okay. So some possible harmful effects from pesticides include acute effects, chronic effects, and delayed effects. And I already talked about the difference between acute and chronic. Acute being when you have a high dose in a short amount of time, and chronic being a low dose over a long period of time. And then sometimes you can be exposed to pesticides and you don't see the effects of it immediately. It might be a day or several days before you would see the effect. So some symptoms of exposure, of course, they're going to vary according to the pesticide and the individual, but it could be rash, headache, nausea, or dizziness. If you're exposed to pesticides and you begin to have these kinds of symptoms, you have a rash that occurs, you're having allergic reaction, then you want to call your doctor. And but some first aid that you can do is if you get pesticides on your skin, you should wash your skin immediately and gently dry it. And any clothes that have become contaminated either should be thrown away or washed. And the label will tell you, how to handle contaminated PPE. It may tell you that you just need to throw the stuff away. So you can find that information on the label as well. If you get the pesticide in your eyes, you're going to need to run water across your eyes for 15 minutes. So that means getting in a stream of water and holding your eye open in it for 15 minutes. If inhaled, you need to get the victim to fresh air and maybe lay them down. If ingested, you should really read the label to see whether you should induce vomiting or not, because some pesticides will say not to induce vomiting because you're actually going to cause more harm doing that. So read the label for that. And administering activated charcoal in water is a good thing for if you ingest it. And to my surprise, and maybe to your surprise, you should not use syrup of ipecac. It's ineffective. Now, this is one of the reasons why pointing out the different parts of the label is so important. So if you do suspect pesticide poisoning, you can call this National Poison Control Center, as well as, of course, the hospital or the doctor. And what they're going to ask you for is that EPA registration number. And that is going to tell them immediately. They're going to be able to look up all the information about that pesticide so that they can get the doctors to get help to you immediately and figure out what's the best way to help you because you've been exposed. So be aware of where those EPA registration numbers are, and they're usually right on the front of the label, okay? And another helpful site is the National Pesticide Information Center, and there's a phone number and email for that. Okay, so it's very important to protect yourself. So PPE is determined by how toxic the pesticide is that you're using, the particular formulation. Is it a powder? Is it a liquid? Are you using a gas? The activity you are performing, and whether you're measuring, mixing, and loading, applying, or performing maintenance operations on your application equipment. So measuring, mixing, and loading are often the times when you have the greatest exposure, because usually you are working with concentrated pesticides, not the ready to use, which is a low concentration of that pesticide. So read the label to figure out exactly which clothing is required, and you want to use chemical resistant materials, especially gloves. So on the label, it will tell you what PPE you should have, and we've already talked about that. So at a minimum, whether the label says it or not, you should wear a long sleeve shirt, long pants, chemical resistant gloves, shoes plus socks, and a hat. Now the gloves, to be chemical resistant, should be, if it doesn't list a particular kind of glove on the label, I suggest getting nitrile gloves. Those are chemical resistant, and there are different thicknesses. So if you're using a pesticide that has only a caution signal word or a warning signal word, then you can use nitrile gloves. Like you may have already bought some and been using because of COVID, but those are disposable and they do not hold up for a long time. So it's one-time use and not for use over a long period of time of applying the pesticide. Nitrile gloves that are more long-lived have to be 14 millimeters thick or thicker, and those can actually be reused. But once again, read the label and see what kind of gloves they're telling you to get. They might tell you to get laminate, or if you were working with some toxic chemicals, they would tell you specifically what kinds of gloves you need to have. Now, latex does not protect you from chemicals, so do not use latex gloves. Okay, so cotton, denim, leather, these are not chemical resistant materials. They will hold the pesticide against your skin. Leather, as I'm sure you can imagine, cannot be cleaned. So you don't want to wear leather boots. Okay, use a rubber boot or like a plastic type boot you use for mucking around. You can use the ball caps, but be aware that you're going to need to wash them, and you should wash them after every use. And I would not use garden gloves for applying pesticides. So use those nitrile gloves instead. So, cotton materials will hold the pesticide next to your skin. So don't use plastic gloves that have some kind of cotton liner inside them either. Okay, so something else you need to consider is the environment around you, sensitive areas when applying pesticides. If you're close to schools, playgrounds, parks, hospitals, wildlife refuges, if your neighbor has a beehive or you have a beehive, these are all things that you should take into consideration before applying your pesticide. Make sure that you're applying it safely so that it does not have any kind of effect on those sensitive areas near you. If you're indoors and you're having an insect problem, be careful about how you apply insecticides in your kitchen where your foodstuffs are. Okay, make sure you read the label. And, you know, I have applied those fogging bombs before to kill fleas in the house, and they were everywhere. So I had them in every room of the house. So if you're going to put them in the kitchen, you need to wash all of your utensils and plates and everything that you cook with. So just keep those kinds of things in mind when applying pesticides. You know, the things, people and places that might be sensitive to pesticides. And also be careful as far as surface water and wells. There are many pesticides that will tell you you may not use them near surface water, and they'll tell you like within 100 feet of surface water or something like that. Okay, so plants can become non-target organisms, and that's what on the label, the section that will talk about phytotoxicity. It will tell you what kind of plant injury you can expect from that chemical. And you may have heard about some of this in the news with Roundup Ready corn or something like that. More likely dicamba ready soybeans, which the soybeans have been genetically modified so that they are able to have a farmer spray the herbicide dicamba over them in order to kill weeds that are competing with the soybeans, which are not, you know, they will be killed by the dicamba. However, there may be farms located next to the farmer who has the dicamba ready soybeans, and his soybeans are not dicamba ready. He's not growing that kind. So if the farmer applies dicamba to his dicamba ready soybeans and there's a wind blowing and it blows that chemical from his field to his neighbor's field, it may kill those soybeans on the other person's property. So just be aware that whatever you're spraying could possibly damage plants, and you want to reduce the risk to your own plants and also to those of your neighbors. Okay. So it's important to avoid drift, and we're going to talk about how to avoid drift. And drift is the movement of your pesticide off target, okay? It's moving away from the thing that you wanted to protect onto something else that it's not intended for. Also, you want to make sure that you try to protect beneficial insects whenever possible. They are your allies in the garden, and they help to keep pest insects under control. So try to minimize your insect usage whenever possible and avoid spray drift, and also make sure you read the label and apply it properly, especially if it has a bee warning on it. Make sure you follow all those directions. So some things that can cause the drift of your spray from the target to someplace you don't want it is if it's too windy. So you should apply pesticides when the wind speeds are between 3 and 9 miles per hour, so less than 10 miles an hour. You don't want a dead calm, because that may actually indicate that there is a temperature inversion, which can cause some weird things to happen with your cloud of pesticide mist that you've just sprayed. It's going to move in unpredictable directions, and it's going to tend to hover and not kind of move up through the environment or up through the atmosphere as it would if there was not a temperature inversion. And temperature inversions usually occur in the early morning and towards evening. And that's when, because normally you're going to have warmer temperatures next to the earth, and then as you go up through the atmosphere, the temperatures get colder. When you have a temperature inversion, it's reversed. The colder temperatures are near the surface of the earth, and the warmer there's a mass of warmer temperature air above the cold air. And that's what causes temperature inversion. So if you've ever looked outside in the fall, you know, and people have smoke coming out of their chimneys, and it doesn't go straight up. It just seems to linger, you know, just a few, you know, maybe 20 feet off the ground. That shows you that there's a temperature inversion. Okay. So other things that affect spray drift include the viscosity of the spray. The more viscous it is, the less likely you are to have drift. Spray droplet size is also important. The larger the droplet, the less likely you will have drift. And the cooler the temperatures, the less likely you will have drift. And when you have high humidity, you have less likelihood of drift. Okay, so it's when you have high temperatures, you have small droplet sizes of your spray, the liquid is not very viscous, and it's windy. Those are the times when you're most likely to have drift of your pesticide. So you want to try and avoid that. Okay, so now we're going to talk about pesticide safety security as far as storage, transport, and disposal. So it's really important to limit access to your pesticides. They should be locked away. And you want to limit the exposure of people and animals to this pesticides, and you want to protect the environment from contamination. You want to avoid temperature extremes and excess moisture. Also, you want stuff to be locked up so people can't steal it, vandalize it, or you don't want your children or other people's children getting into those pesticides. And you also need to be concerned about your own liabilities, because these are chemicals that can be hazardous. Where you store them and mix them. Now this is a picture of the ideal way to do this. So most homeowners are not, not going to have a detached structure that has the climate, the temperature regulated in it. Okay, I realize that. So this particular slide is geared more towards farmers, people who apply pesticides for a living. Okay, but you might have a detached building that is temperature controlled, where you can store the pesticides and keep them locked up. That is the best scenario. The next best, I would say, is out in the garage where it doesn't freeze and you can lock it in a cabinet. Okay, now out in the shed is not that great. It's detached and you can keep it locked. However, the temperature extremes in there are not going to be good for the pesticides. You don't want your pesticides to freeze, okay? Also, having a sealed concrete floor is best in case you have a spill. It is easy to clean up and it doesn't penetrate into wood. And you wouldn't be, if it penetrates into your wood, you can't get it out of the wood, so a sealed concrete floor is best. And do not store or mix near wells, streams, lakes, or storm drains. Consider storm drains if you live in an urban area. So you should be at least 50 feet away from these things and on the downhill from them. So the best way to store pesticides is on metal shelving. And if it had a metal lip, that would be awesome. But if not, you can always set your pesticide container inside of a plastic tub, that if your container were to get a hole in it and it did start to leak, the tub would be large enough to catch all of that fluid so it wouldn't leak out onto the floor or onto anything else. If at all possible, you should make sure the site is secure. So if you have to keep pesticides in your house, you really need to keep them under lock and key so that children or other people visiting do not or cannot have access to these chemicals. And if you have like a specific area that you're keeping all these pesticides, it's good to put a sign on there that says danger pesticides. If things are flammable that you're storing, then you need to have a sign saying so that people won't be smoking or doing other hazardous things near your flammable liquids. You should always store your pesticides in the original containers. Do not pour them into any kind of food or beverage container. That's how a lot of poisonings happen. So please don't do that. If you should have to, for some reason, transfer the liquid into another container, make sure that it is not a food or beverage container and label it with what pesticide it is, what chemical is in it, the brand, and the EPA registration number, okay? Do not store your food, drinks, tobacco, animal feed, any kind of medication for you or your pets, vet supplies, seed, clothing, or personal protective equipment alongside of your pesticides. You got to store them separately. Okay, and wherever you're storing them, try to make sure that it's well ventilated, especially if there's a possibility that it's volatile and there's going to be fumes. And as I mentioned before, you want to keep your pesticides from freezing, and you also want to protect them from extremely high temperatures, especially if they're volatile or flammable, explosive. Okay, so store your personal protective equipment where it's easily accessible, especially in the event of emergency. So it would be a good idea to have your chemical resistant gloves and boots, hats, even if you have some kind of a suit, if necessary, for the kind of pesticides that you are applying. Have them in one area that's easily accessible and is not stored right with your pesticides. And make sure, as Ashley mentioned, if you've lost a label, that you download it from the internet so that you have that label on hand. When transporting pesticides, you have to be mindful of making sure they are secure. You don't want them rolling around the back of your pickup bed where they could get punctured or the container damaged and then have pesticides start to leak out all over the place. And if at all possible, you should not have people and pesticides in the same compartment. Now, I know a lot of people have SUVs where the storage area in the back is not necessarily completely separated from the rest of the vehicle. So you have to do the best you can. You would put it in that back section of the hatchback, but it's best if you would have a completely separate area, like if you had a trunk or you have a pickup truck. You just have to tie down your pesticides so they're not rolling around in the back of the pickup truck there. And you don't want to transport your pesticides alongside of your groceries. So don't have your rat poison sitting next to your loaf of bread you just got from the grocery store. You make sure you keep your pesticides and food and animal feed stuff and seed and everything else separate in the vehicle when you're transporting it. And finally, disposal and recycling. Make sure you triple rinse your containers after they are emptied of the pesticide. And if at all possible, it's best to use that container rinse when making a spray batch up. So if you're using a concentrate and you have to take, say, a couple ounces of your pesticide and put it into your backpack sprayer, whatever kind of sprayer you have, take that rinsate and put it in there instead of using the hose to fill up your backpack sprayer. And that'll be a good way to get rid of that pesticide. So once your containers are cleaned, read the label and see how it says you should dispose of them. You may be able to take them to a regular recycling site, or you might have to take them to a special site for pesticides. And also, I think it's a good idea to poke holes in the container after cleaning. Okay, and that's all. So Ashley, I think you probably have some poll questions.
Yes, ma'am. I'm going to go ahead and throw those up now. So if you guys would please take a few minutes to answer these 3 questions, we would appreciate it. All right, Sherry, we did have a question. I entered in the chat. Somebody asked, how do we clean up a spill? And I recommended kitty litter or sawdust. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, that's great. If it's a liquid, that's a good way to do it. And then you can just gather all that up and put it into a plastic container. And then you may need to, it's be a hazardous material, so you'd have to be careful on how you disposed of it after that. But yeah, that's a good way.
Great. And one more was about the expiration date on a product. So if you've had it for several years, is there a certain time limit to use them? And is there a number of years that you should throw it out automatically? I thought that there was a expiration date on there.
You know what? I'm not sure. Nothing's coming to mind. Although, if you notice that, you've been keeping something out in the shed and it's gone through winters and summers out there, and it's not going to last as long. It's just not going to do well. It's going to degrade, and if the carrier that it's dissolved in, that might start getting weird too. So yeah, I'd look on the label for sure for a start. But if you notice that when you go to use it, it's all like goopy and not the way it was when you first bought it, like it's coming, you know what I'm saying?
Right. It's not in the same form it was.
Yeah, it's not the same form it was. It's breaking down, then it's probably not good to use anymore.
Yeah, my recommendation was to use it as quickly as possible in the chat. So
yes. All
right. Well, does anybody else have questions? It was a pretty quiet chat box. I didn't have much going on. We have one. It says, if you have some diluted chemical mix left, how do you dispose of it if you no longer need it?
Okay, so it depends on what it is, and you're going to need to read the label. It tells you how to dispose of that. Can you be more specific?
That's all. Yeah, we can ask the person that entered the chat question there. But again, I think it'll tell you that exactly on the label how to dispose of it. So every chemical is so different that.
That's right. Oh, Roundup. Okay. So you shouldn't just dump it out. You shouldn't really do that with any pesticide. And I'd have to check whether that's one that you have got to take to a special site or not. But what you could do is try to use it up. And I mean, if there's an area that you're trying to kill weeds in, just go back and spray it again. So, or spray other areas that you want to control the weeds in, sidewalk or driveway. So.
Right. Yeah, that's good advice. You really shouldn't share with a neighbor, but if they have a site maybe that you could go and spray for them or something, maybe that's a thought.
Yeah, so the cat litter and sawdust would probably help to deactivate it. Once it goes into like the soil, it starts to break down. So, but I would have to research on whether or not it's safe to then put that in the garbage. So.
Right. Yeah, again, the label should tell you that specific for each product because every product has a different formulation. So, it just kind of depends that's not just something we're trying to throw out to people, but it really is just all the information is there on the label. So,
yeah,
for the specific product.
Yeah, there's not a one size fits all. So.
Exactly. All right. Well, if anybody else has questions, we'll be here for we'll stay on for a couple minutes. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. But we thank you all.